You're listening to The Pipeline, the Western Standards National Affairs Program, recording this Wednesday, April 29th, 2020. Each week, we break down the issues, discuss them in depth, and examine some of the broader implications for Western Canada and beyond. Featuring from Calgary, the Western Standards publisher, Grizzly Adams, aka Derek Fildebrandt. How are you, Derek? Okay, we'll take that as a.
I will be speaking in a series of grunts for this episode to convey my thoughts.
But we won't mention why, because we're not talking about that this episode. Featuring also from Dave Naylor from Calgary, the news editor. Dave, how are you doing?
I think I'm handling the that word we're not going to speak tonight. The lockdown there. I think I'm handling it a little bit better than Derek.
Outstanding. And hosted by myself, digital editor Paul Holmes, here from Victoria, British Columbia, which you can see behind me.
No, we can't. That's an image of a foggy bridge.
It truly is. Anyway, from my basement. So topics today will include guns. We're talking about guns again for some reason in this country. We're talking about the Wildrose Independence Party, which sounds like something old and new again at the same time. And we're also going to be talking about the media bailout 2.0. So before we get into the topics today, just wanted to remind everybody, if you're not already a member at Western Standard, please visit our website, westernstandardonline.com. Click on that membership page, and you can become a member there, which supports our work and means we can have a lot of fun like this on a regular basis. So, Dave, why don't you tell us about the latest with gun control in Canada?
Well, breaking news tonight, Wednesday night. It's been reported that the federal Liberals are going to ban 11 different types of weapons. Radio-Canada has said they've got sources to say that it's already in the hands of the Prime Minister. They don't know which weapons will be banned, and it could be announced as early as tomorrow, which would be Thursday. Obviously, this comes on the heels of the terrible incidents in Nova Scotia, where Canada's worst mass murder took place. 22 people killed, 13 shot to death, 9 died by fire that the killer set. Police have only said that the killer had got his weapons illegally. He got them from...
Sorry, just to clarify, David, was that legally or illegally? We had a bit of a quirk there with the video.
Sorry, illegally.
Illegally, okay,
He got
that's
them
important.
illegally from the United States and Canada.
Oh, okay.
So we did not have a... RCMP called it a firearms acquisition certificate. That's now the PAL certificate. He did not have any of those, so all his weapons were illegal. But that didn't stop Prime Minister Trudeau or the Security Minister Blair the very next day saying that they would be rushing in a weapons ban quickly, even though they admitted they didn't know what type of guns were involved. The RCMP revealed Tuesday that one of the weapons, quote, could be described as a military assault rifle, unquote. And as Derek will explain, those have been banned in Canada for a very, very long time. So it's stay tuned in the next couple of days. Keep a close eye on our website because it looks like it's going to be breaking news.
Well, obviously, a terrible story out of Nova Scotia. My family member of mine through marriage had a cousin that actually died in that terrible incident, and so strikes I think all of us pretty harshly and a little close to home for me as well. But Derek, this guy got a bunch of illegal weapons, did a bunch of terrible stuff with his weapons he wasn't supposed to have. Now the government's going to ban a bunch of legal weapons. Is this just political opportunism at using a crisis to your advantage? What do you think?
Well, the Liberals have already said they were going to do these things, but obviously they are using the timing of this mass murder to really give some impetus to it, to use the political opportunity that it presents to try and push this forward, because they know it'll be controversial in rural parts of Canada and across the West. But the media have been reticent to criticize the police during this, because the police are also victims in what's happened. A police officer was killed and murdered in cold blood in this. But the police appear to have really dropped the ball, if nothing else, in their communications. I don't know how you can have a mass murder on the loose for 11 or 12. How many hours was this? Can you tell me, Dave? It was a very long time.
It started about 10:20 p.m. and the gunman was killed about 11:30. So more than 12 hours.
Yeah, that's I mean, I don't think he would have lasted more than about 30 minutes at most if this had happened in Texas, say. But even in Canada, this is a very long time for a gunman to be on the loose. Even if the citizens around are not armed and able to do anything about it, the police should have done something about this. But the police have been extremely shown an extreme lack of transparency in providing any information about this. They've not really been answering questions. They've been releasing information, sometimes very misleading information. And so far, both the police and the politicians overseeing them have not released a very key information, like, did this guy have a gun license? They have not told us. That's a pretty important piece of information. What were the guns used? They're only beginning now, more than a week later, to tell us what kind of weapons are being used. So even under Canada's current gun regime, which is still very tight, this guy had no access to any of the guns that he used. He did not have a single gun used legally. These were stolen guns from people that he killed, like the police, or they were guns brought illegally from the United States, we believe. But the police have not, the police and the politicians have done a remarkably poor job in reporting on this. And now the Liberals, they're not just pulling this out of their back pocket. They've been planning on doing this, but they are now using the opportunity afforded by a tragedy like this to push it forward, and showing a remarkable lack of understanding of fundamental rights. In the story that Dave Naylor did on this just a few hours ago, he quoted Bill Blair, Liberal cabinet minister, I think, in charge of public safety, saying that gun ownership is not a right; it is a privilege. And so, in this country, getting free things paid for by other people is a right, but keeping your own private property that you've purchased yourself and you're not hurting anybody else with, that's a privilege. Well, that's the modern Canada we're living in.
Well, definitely a huge tragedy, but I don't. I think I concur with you, Derek. I don't know that you and I are the same level of gun enthusiast, but I don't think that a tragedy should be used as a backdrop, it really ever, but especially because in this case, these weren't legally acquired guns. And we see, and there's such a disconnect there. Like, if they happen to be legally acquired guns, you could make a good case to say, well, maybe certain guns shouldn't be available, or maybe there should be different rules so guys like this don't get guns. But it doesn't sound like either of those apply in this case. And so, it shouldn't stand on its own merits here, right? But
and the RCMP have said they're looking to see whether he had help, right? So somehow some of these weapons, at least, got from the United States into Canada. Yeah. Now they're investigating how that happened. You would think that somehow they were smuggled in. The RCMP started out as a complete train wreck in this whole thing. The first press conference they had was perhaps the worst press conference I've ever seen a police official have in almost 4 decades of journalism. It was truly awful and cringeworthy. They've gotten better during the 5 or 6 days afterwards, but they instilled no trust that first day. And yeah, it's sad that the government is having to come in on the heels of such a massive tragedy. And now there's a huge population of gun owners that are just waiting on tenterhooks to see what is going to be banned.
Yeah, and so many questions around the incident as well. Like, what was the motivation of the guy? Of course, how did he get all the weapons? He had some criminal history expunged that involved an accomplice. Is that accomplice somebody he's still connected to? You know, is there more people connected to this?
And don't forget all the fake police cars.
Well, and uniforms, and yeah, like there's definitely.
Well, and the police knew about these fake police cars. This was well established. He had a reputation. He had several of these things, different models, different years. This was known. So he gets a hold of guns that are already illegal, but we now need to ban other guns that weren't used. But it's completely okay that this guy's got, like, I get pissed off when I'm driving down the highway and I'm doing, 5 over, and I see a car behind me and I think it's a cop, and I'm slow for about half an hour, and eventually, I see the guy up close, and it's just a decommissioned cop car that someone bought at an auction. That really pisses me off when someone's driving those. And they're not intentionally marked to look like a cop car. They're just decommissioned ones. They got the special hubcaps and stuff. That bothers me because I have to drive like an old lady for quite a while. But
he had actually purchased 4 police cars, old police cars at auction. One of them, which he had put decals on, real RCMP decals, and a light bar, the red and blue, red and white lights that they've got on the top.
How was that legal?
It seemed to be well known about the time, well known around town that he had these. On the press conference yesterday, Tuesday, by the RCMP said they had absolutely no knowledge of these cars previously.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that I saw that was interesting was, and I don't know how authentic it was, maybe David, but the high school yearbook that talked about in his graduation that he was voted most likely to become a police officer, or most likely to join the RCMP or something like that. And so this guy obviously had some love or affinity for the police force. So what did he just decide to collect a bunch of their memorabilia because he was such a big fan, even though he was a dental hygienist or whatever?
He was a denturist.
Denturist, yeah.
They make a lot more money than an RCMP officer. But throughout his life, he seems to have been fascinated by police and specifically the RCMP. Collecting uniforms. The RCMP said that they can be bought at auction or in surplus stores and stuff like that. But yeah, he was a one-man walking and driving fake RCMP officer.
Well, all of that is
hundreds of kilometers in Nova Scotia because he looked like an RCMP officer.
Yeah.
He pulled Western Standard sources said he was using his vehicle to pull over people or have them stop, and he would shoot them. Because is there anything worse as a Canadian, or actually anywhere, I guess, that you trust the police, right? And when you see the police behind you and they pull you over, you trust them.
Dave, I just watched the Waco miniseries, so I really don't trust the police right now.
So you've moved on from Tiger King, have you?
But you'd still pull over. You'd still pull over if they pulled in behind you and lit you up.
I probably would, but if they come to my compound.
Well, that sounds like a fantastic place to segue. Derek, I think you heard of a political party at one time called the Wildrose Party. And certainly I have heard of the Freedom Conservative Party of Alberta. In fact, interviewed somebody from that. And of course, we've all heard of Wexit. David, what the heck is going on here?
The Wildrose is back, baby. It seems like there's dozens of little separatist parties around Alberta. The 2 biggest ones are Wexit and the Freedom Conservative Party, the FCP. And for the last 9 months, they seem to have got it figured out that the only way that they're going to achieve their goal of independence, or in fact, even just become relevant, is to join forces. So after 9 months of negotiations, they are setting the groundwork. They've put out a framework. They've set I think it's June 29th, They're going to have a teleconference or a internet vote, and by all accounts, they're going to be joining forces to become the Wildrose Independence Party, or WHIP for short.
WHIP. And you broke the story for the Western Standard on Monday, right?
Monday, yeah. It was, and I'll tell you, those stories there's a lot of interest in them, a lot of clicks.
Yeah,
a lot of people want to know about it. A lot of people. 40% of Albertans say that they're okay with independence. So that's a lot of people out there that are keeping their eye on it.
Derek, obviously we had a couple of editorials this week, including yours. What are your thoughts?
Well, as Dave said a bit there's a whole constellation of the Western independence movement across the whole West, and particularly in Alberta. Several official parties, several unofficial parties, and it was just pretty clear nothing's going anywhere unless they get their act together. And libertarians, conservatives, and separatists tend to be a rather individualistic lot, so it's very difficult for them to come together and do anything. They tend to splinter apart. So this is an interesting moment. Independence has become, in the last year or so, has become a more mainstream topic. It's begun to move from the cranky fringes into a more broad acceptance in the mainstream, but has not yet had a political party with any horsepower backing it or any kind of significant public leader to do it. This signals the possibility that could change. It still requires them to attract a credible leader, still requires them to develop some political maturity and moving away from being a little political bridge club. But I was surprised they got the name Wildrose Independence Party. That's going to have some people very upset that name was legally allowed to be resurrected, that Elections Alberta allowed that. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of nostalgia, I think, for that name in some quarters in Alberta.
I imagine you have a little yourself.
I might have a bit of nostalgia for the Wildrose. But it's, some people are moved past it. They're like, no, I don't want to do it again. All that matters is keeping the NDP out, and that's all that matters, period. Sure. But for a lot of people, they've been given the Tories a chance. There's a strange number of people in Alberta who think that on both the left and right, who believe Jason Kenney might be a secret separatist, and they just have to convince him. The left are convinced he is. The right has been trying to see if he comes around. That's not been happening, and he's not had any wins. A guy elected on a platform of getting big wins against Ottawa for Alberta hasn't had a single significant win against Ottawa. None of the things he's talked about in Fair Deal has happened. So, if Kenney fails to deliver, and this party can demonstrate some political maturity, that they don't want to be just a little tiny social club, and attract a credible leader and do the hard work that's necessary, there is a possibility that they'll be able to, as I put it, upset the federalist duopoly in Alberta, of the two-party state in which both agree that Alberta needs to be under Ottawa.
It's funny. Alberta loves to burn their politicians at the stake. And from a side perspective here in British Columbia, I don't have any opinion on Jason Kenney beyond seems like a pretty nice guy. He he's credible. He was obviously federal. He's obviously a federalist. He was a federal cabinet minister, but he sent British Columbia a bunch of personal protective equipment, which was super nice, as well as sending that to Quebec and Ontario. I don't know what you guys have a problem with this guy for. So anyway, that's my BC opinion for today, for whatever it's worth. We can talk about the BC.
You're just hoping we don't send a rat patrol to invade.
It's I don't see what the problem is. Anyway, I do, though, however, agree that Alberta has lots of reasons to be unhappy about their place in Confederation.
Paul, I think, Paul, it was you, maybe it was David, I think it was you, started talking about something old, something new, and that actually started making me think how relevant that is. Something old, the Wildrose, something new, independence, something borrowed, again, the Wildrose, and something blue, There's a lot that makes sense in that old saying, and it is a marriage of two parties that are lesser by themselves.
Yeah, and for the record for anybody who's listening, the original Wildrose Party was not a separatist party officially. As I understand it.
Officially.
There were definitely...
We were all sympathizers.
Sure. Well, and no question, the original Wildrose Party wanted to secure a better place in Confederation officially for Alberta, right?
Wildrose was not a sovereigntist party per se. Mm-hmm. It included a bunch of ex-active sovereigntists,
sure.
like Corey Morgan, one of our main columnists. Yeah. He was the leader of the Alberta Independence Party in the 90s.
Yeah.
And he went on to become a founding member of the Wildrose Party. So it had a bunch of guys who had gone through it. It had not really gone anywhere, and then they went into the Wildrose as the next best thing. But I can tell you, behind the scenes, we all said, none of us wanted independence, but we all thought we might be forced to come to grips with it someday. And if that party hadn't have disappeared, there's a very good chance it would be actively leading an independence movement today. But that's impossible to say.
So would Corey be kind of the Lucien Bouchard of Alberta politics then?
He's even crustier than me. I don't know about that.
All right. There we go. Wildrose. So interesting times.
We got to get Corey on here, actually. We haven't had him on yet. We should get Corey on.
You know what? I did a fantastic interview with Corey quite a while ago, and the video sucked and the audio sucked, and we ended up not publishing.
I remember that.
Super guy. Really enjoyed that experience. Not sure we agreed on very much politically, but definitely a charming fella. All right, let's talk about.
Hey Paul, you're now our token Democrat.
Well, I gotta say, without Deirdre here, I'm taking up the left flank a bit.
I want to ask Corey because I might not even be the right anymore. It'd be great.
I admitted on Facebook this week when somebody accused me of defending Donald Trump that which I wasn't. That I was a little bit of a fan of Andrew Yang's. Not because of his policies, just because he seemed like a really smart guy. And that seemed really new and such a good idea for politicians. Anyway, on to media bailouts. So didn't we already have a media bailout? What's going on here, Dave?
We did. We had a media bailout last year. I think it was close to $600 million, which...
fixed everything. Right?
Fixed everything. Yeah, everything's good. Then that thing that we're not allowed to talk about tonight hit and has decimated the newspaper industry in Canada. Post Media announced this week they were closing weekly or community papers, in Ontario and Manitoba, 15 of them. All their staff took pay cuts. 30% for the CEO, down to 5% for the lowly paid reporter. And Quebec Corps thinking about chopping 10% of their staff. So the media has had a really hard time during this pandemic. Advertising rates are down 50% across the board, and they're hurting. For me, this is just a continued part of their slide. They've been hurting for years. The revenues are going down for years. Advertising's been going down for years, and they've been slow to realize that and change their operating structure. Now they want some more. Obviously, they want a chunk of the relief money that's coming out, and the government says yes, it's coming, and it'll be coming soon.
One of you guys needs to shut your messenger. You got
that's
things
David.
Popping up.
That's David. Derek, you're a big fan of media bailouts, right? Why don't you tell us what you think?
Yeah. Well, the media bailout last year was $600 million. Yeah. But that's a $600 million every single year. That's an annual subsidy. That's a big chunk of cash, and it's every single year that it goes out.
It's only half of the CBC budget, isn't it?
Yeah, actually, it's about half the CBC, and it's going on. And that's on top of a lot of other, what I would call regulatory corporate welfare. On the cable side, mandatory carriage, all sorts of stuff. There's print subsidies already, mail subsidies for distribution. There's a lot of things that are already there. And so this comes on top. And it's frustrating, as the only major media outlet in Western Canada that I'm aware of that does not take government money, these guys are taking even more. And our advertising has been hurt. We've been spending a lot of time, especially in the last week, trying to correct that and move forward. We've had advertisers canceled because advertising is a discretionary spend for most businesses,
Sure.
Especially if you're not an online business. And that's the first thing to go. And so, we've been hurt by that. All the media have been hurt by it. But the government's coming in, throwing even more cash at our competitors. And there's no way that this does not affect coverage. You do not have a free press in a country if the press is funded by the government. As much as they say, if you take the money from the government, you're working for the government. So everybody who's working at these places, they might not like Trudeau, but they're essentially employees of him, and don't believe for a second that it doesn't affect their coverage.
So Derek, in the middle of the situation that the world is experiencing right now, just to play devil's advocate, are we not all employees of the government right now with 75% wage subsidies and all this other stuff going on? Shouldn't, since that's going on in the world, should we not bend our principles here at the Western Standard to comply with that?
I could have benefited greatly in the past from bending principles, and I'm not going to start now where it's worth even less. If I'm going to bend my principles, it's got to be worth a lot more than a little bit of cash from Trudeau for the Western Standard here. Although I'm sure everybody working for the Standard might appreciate if maybe I didn't. I can't blame anyone else. I encourage you all to apply for everything you can get. As far as I'm concerned, you've all paid a bunch of taxes. Most people in the West have gotten shit back from the government, so get back whatever you can. I can understand that argument, but we're not taking it. But yeah, fair enough. Yeah, the number of people who applied for CERB is some of the preliminary numbers we're seeing is that it might be up to half of the workforce. That'd be the 10 in Parliament. One of the ministers there said that 10 million people have applied for it out of a workforce of 19 million. That doesn't mean 50% unemployment, because you can still apply if you're on part-time, etc., under certain circumstances. But clearly, yeah, we're all working for the government now. It's just particularly dangerous when the press is working for the government. Agreed. And it's permanent. This isn't even a temporary bailout like GM, which was terrible enough. The government is making the media effectively a permanent arm of the government. And Canada's media landscape is traditionally already compliant enough. Their disagreements with government are rather perfunctory and around the margins. There's very little fundamental disagreement with things beyond the extreme fringes. But we do have a light media landscape. Governments can get away with a lot in Canada because there's very little to cover it. Municipalities, especially in small towns, municipalities can do virtually anything they want because there'll be one part-time beat reporter who doesn't even know how to file a Freedom of Information request. And so there is a remarkable lack of accountability, and there is a problem with the media economic model in Canada. The media is bleeding to death. The answer to that, I don't really know if there is an answer, but it definitely is not to make us all working for the government.
Well, for the record, I have no idea how to file a Freedom of Information request. That's why I'm the digital editor and not a journalist.
I'm wondering if Derek accepts Trudeau money, what kind of compound he could build.
There you go. We tie right back to the first story.
You've got my word now. If the Western Standard accepts any money, I am going to build a heavily fortified compound.
Well, on that note, please, listener, if
no,
you're not a member of the Western Standard, please become a member now so that none of this happens. But in all seriousness, of course,
we need you guys to become members so we don't take money and start building compounds.
There we go. Of course, you're going to become a member because you want to support journalism that isn't just another government subsidy. So thank you in advance, everybody who's rushing to the website right now to sign up. And that's all I've got on the agenda. Dave, any closing thoughts? You've been a journalist for a long time, right?
Yes, feels like forever.
Like, how do you feel about all of this? Honestly, you know, I don't know. Speak from your heart here, Dave.
You have to be a bit more specific, Paul, when you say all of this.
all this media bailout, and I mean, you watch. I mean, you've been in this industry. You're a professional in this field, and you're just watching the government run roughshod over all of kind of. I don't know if I'm being absurd here, but over like the whole principles behind freedom of speech. By it's hard to imagine a press being free and independent when they're totally reliant on the government for their funding. Am I off base on this?
I agree. I spent almost 40 years in what you would call the mainstream media, and every weekend I'm seeing my old colleagues getting laid off or being forced to take retirement. To me, it's I think Derek described it as a long death. To me, it's not working. Whatever formula they've got set up for their business is not working. CBC wouldn't work if it didn't get $1 billion a year. To me, it's time to if it needs to wither and die, then it needs to wither and die. But something will come up from the ashes that is better. And that's,
the Western Standard.
What we're starting to do here on the, Western Standard website and compound building platform. That, the days of the regular newspaper obviously are long gone. The advertiser has way too many options, cheaper options to spread their word. The days of the newspaper are numbered.
Even, you take government subsidies out of the equation, and fundamentally the business model still has issues, right? And you can say with mainstream media, but also frankly with alternative media, including, publications like the Western Standard, we care about clicks, we care about eyeballs, because that's how we translate stories into dollars. And I feel like there's a more fundamental issue, and maybe this is for another time, but I feel like there's a more fundamental issue with, journalistic ethics in general, because we're not, we don't want to be writing the stories for the clicks. We want to be writing the stories for the great content, and that becomes, the self-fulfilling, fantastic business. But there's definitely players, I would say, in the mainstream media and in the alternative media that are all about clicks and forget ethics at all.
In fairness to journalists, Paul, at the reporter level, I have never met anybody who just didn't want to tell a good story, who loved being part of the action, who loved to be in the front row of history.
I agree with you. Yeah.
It's when you get up into the upper levels of management that you have to worry about, being a slave to the federal government, or will somebody be angry about this story? Will an advertiser pull their ads because of this story? But down at the base level, the reporter level, good group of people.
Well, I got to say, Dave, it's been a super pleasure getting to know you better over the last little while. And you and Deirdre are certainly two of my favorite journalists in Canada. So on that happy note,
what about me?
Derek Fildebrandt,
I gotta say, just
pretty
before
good guy.
I am looking forward to the Western Standard Christmas party at Derek's compound in December.
Yeah, as long as we practice social distancing, because that's going to go till 2023.
Into the night, it'll be awesome.
It's going to be exclusive. I guess, Paul, I don't pay you enough to force you to say nice things about me.
You know, I'm kind of the devil's advocate, so you know, I'm just playing the role. I do love you, Derek. My original idea of the Western Standard Cruise, I guess, is out for a couple of years, eh?
No, the Western Standard Cruise is me, Dave, and Rick Strankman on a dinghy going down to South Saskatchewan, stealing wheats and barley.
There we go.
You don't hear anything more about the Globe and Mail cruise anymore, do you?
No, they were too high budget. We could make the low budget Western Standard one where we go pillaging wheats and barley and shooting ducks, but that's because we're not as pretentious as the Globe and Mail. We keep our budget under control. That's why we don't need bailouts.
Well, great to see you guys again.
You have a budget?
Believe it or not, there's something.
Great to see you guys again. And to everybody who's listening, we wish everybody well. I know this is a difficult time for a reason we're not going to talk about, but we do wish everybody well. And thanks for joining us this week. And we'll come to you again next week. Take care.
Cheers.